Hi, let's have a talk about the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is a part of your cardiovascular system which mirrors the arteries and the veins. It's a means of bringing materials back into the cardiovascular system that may be lost to the interstitial tissue. If you look at this gentleman here, you can see that he is a network of green organs and vessels that all lead back to the thorax here. What you can also determine by the shading is that there is an interesting pattern of drainage, and that is that the right thorax and the right half of the head and neck, as well as the right upper limb, are all one drainage unit, and the remainder of the body is another drainage unit. And so what we have is this green draining into the right lymphatic duct, which enters into the right venous angle, and most of the lymph flow from the body returning back on the left side into the thoracic duct. The lymphatic system is going to mirror the vasculature of the cardiovascular system. So it's going to pull back any plasma from the interstitial tissue back into the cardiovascular system at two locations. One location is the thoracic duct at the left venous angle in the thorax, and the other is the right lymphatic duct at the right venous angle of the thorax. Seeing from this individual here, we can determine that there are two areas of drainage. One that's draining the right upper limb, right half of the thorax, and right head and neck, and the other that's draining the remainder of the individual. And so that right upper limb, right half of the thorax, and right half of the head and neck are going to the right lymphatic duct, whereas all of the remainder of the lymph is flowing back into the thoracic duct. In addition to reclaiming filtered plasma, the lymphatic system is also an important way of moving fatty acids from the GI system up through the liver, and it's a place for your immune system to be hosted, to develop, and to mature. What we see is that lymphatic capillaries are embedded and enmeshed around the capillaries of the cardiovascular system within the interstitial tissue. Lymphatic capillaries are very simple. They are one-layered cells, which you can see here, and there's unidirectional flow of plasma into these lymphatic capillaries, such that they absorb all of that unclaimed filtered plasma from the interstitial tissue. Now, these lymphatic capillaries feed into lymphatic vessels. Lymphatic vessels are going to coalesce into various lymphatic trunks that are generally named for their anatomic position. So, for instance, on the right side of the slide here, we can see both the right lymphatic duct draining into the right venous angle and the thoracic duct draining into the left venous angle. Now, each of these ducts are fed into by lymphatic trunks. Now, the three major trunks that are going to be supplying these ducts are the bronchomediastinal trunks, which are coming up from the lungs through the mediastinum of the thorax, ascending superiorly. There are also subclavian trunks, which are bringing in lymph from the upper limbs under the clavicle, and jugular trunks, which are returning lymph from the head and neck. And so we can see the coalescence of these trunks here feeding into the right lymphatic duct, and we can see the coalescence of these trunks here in addition to the thoracic duct, which is making its way up from the abdominal cavity on the left side. Now, there are various organs which comprise the lymphatic system, and we can divide these up into both primary and secondary lymphatic organs. Primary lymphatic organs are things like the thymus gland and red bone marrow, or hematopoietic connective tissue. These are places of stem cell mitosis and immunocompetence, meaning stem cells which would give rise to blood cells are creating new blood cells. And specialized blood cells such as lymphocytes are gaining the ability to recognize antigens and react to them. Secondary lymphatic organs, such as the spleen and lymph nodes and nodules, are simply places where immune responses may be hosted, among other functions. The thymus gland is an interesting part of the mediastinum. So here we can see the thymus gland sitting within both the superior and the anterior mediastinum. The thymus gland itself is bilobed, so there are two separate constituent bodies of glandular material here, and they're connected along the midline. Thymus gland is at its greatest glandular mass, approximately just beyond puberty, and then it begins to diminish. It goes through a process known as fibrosis, where that glandular material is replaced by adipose connective tissue. And that's why in older individuals, their thymus gland appears as two masses of thymic fat. Now, the thymus gland has two portions to it. There's an outer cortex and an inner medulla. That outer cortex is for T cell selection and maturation, meaning it's here that T cells are really going through their early stages of nascent development up through becoming fully immunocompetent. And then they migrate to the medulla, where they may be further selected, such that they're not autoreactive or would have an immune response against an individual's own cells. We can see the thymic fat here in this image. So it's sitting just below the root of the neck, medial to the lungs, and anterior to the heart, encased in its pericardium. And this particular individual was of sufficiently advanced age that the thymus gland is now thymic fat. Lymph nodes and nodules are secondary lymphatic organs. The difference between the two is an outermost capsule. So lymph nodes have a connective tissue capsule that surrounds them, whereas lymph nodules do not. Lymph nodes are clustered, and those clusters of lymph nodes are typically named for the anatomical region that they're serving. And you can see that they are fed by afferent lymphatic vessels, bringing lymph and its contents into the lymph node. And within the lymph node, we bring antigens and antigen-presenting cells into contact with T cells and B cells, or lymphocytes, such that a host can mount an immune response. Afterwards, these nodes are drained via efferent lymphatic vessels that are going to coalesce into various lymphatic trunks. The nodules lack that connective tissue capsule. Typically, we refer to these as MALT, or mucosal-associated lymphatic tissues. You're probably already familiar with some of this, such as the tonsils that surround your pharynx. So these are supporting immune responses in the upper pharynx or the throat. And there are also specialized patches of these nodules embedded within the mucosa of the GI, specifically the small intestine, called Peyer's patches, which brings the immune system into intimate contact with that gastrointestinal mucosa so that it may best mount an immune response against any pathogens making their way in through the GI. And they can also be present to help collect and then ultimately transport any fatty acids up to the liver. And then finally, we have the spleen. The spleen is the body's largest collection of lymphatic tissue. It's located in the left hypochondriac region, which is that area inferior to the diaphragm, but still surrounded in part by the bony rib cage. The spleen consists of two sets of tissues which have two drastically different functions. The white pulp is where lymphocytes are going to act, or we can have immune function. The red pulp is what best serves the cardiovascular system. So it's working for filtering erythrocytes, helping to store platelets, and at different times in development, even helping to generate new blood cells. Now here we can see that there are different impressions for the spleen because in that left hypochondriac region, it's going to come into contact with several different organs. So we can see here a gastric impression formed from the body of the stomach. We can also see a renal impression from the left kidney. We can see a colic impression from the large intestine here. And we can see that the spleen is served by two major vessels. There's the splenic artery, which is a branch of the celiac trunk, which is a very tortuous or curvy artery that enters the spleen at the hilum. And then blood is drained from the spleen via the splenic vein, which is one of two veins, the other being the superior mesenteric vein, which comes together to form the hepatic portal vein that transports blood from the GI to the liver. And finally, we can see the spleen in situ in a cadaveric image. So the spleen is located here. We can see just a hint of that splenic artery along with the stomach. The left kidney is hidden by this connective tissue here, and we can see the large intestine and that splenic flexure of the transverse colon there. We've talked a little bit about the large picture approach to how lymph is drained from the body. Some of the major players with regards to the organs of the lymphatic system and some of its functions. In later lessons, we're going to talk about the patterns of lymph drainage in each region of the body.